We now open the conference with an intriguing look at Hong Kong, the place and its people. We will first have Professor Longsang Chan, Deputy Director of HKU Space, Department of Earth Sciences from the University of Hong Kong, to give us a lecture on a challenge for the most livable city of the world. Professor Chan?
Good morning, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. And I'd like to start my talk by trying to convince you that Hong Kong is actually the most livable city on earth. Now, we often heard about the livable cities, and we heard about Vienna, Singapore, Melbourne being rated among the top ones. But hey, wait a minute. What do we mean by livable? And who does the livability ranking, And what are the factors counted in this livability ranking? Often we talk about education and transportation, infrastructure, cultural activities, healthcare, etc. And honestly, many of these cities are very comparable, and Hong Kong can easily rated among the top ones. And also, livable for home. Turns out that a lot of these ratings are done by the economics journals, media, etc., and they use that ranking to calculate hardship allowance and living expenses, bonuses. And often, the local residents' perception is not included in the livability ratings. Now, for me, it's very simple. I'm a geologist, and I love outdoor. And I'd like to ask this question. Can the grassroots, the average citizen of a place, have ready access to a variety of places for safe and quiet day out, a city escape, escape from the crowds that the film showed, at the cost of a small fraction of the daily wage? Think about this. The average citizen, making minimal money, not affluent people, can take public transport and get, a quiet day out. We've been to many places, and I have to say Hong Kong is yes, and not any of those places. You have to drive. You don't have a car, you take public transport. London, New York, talking about New York, taking public transport could be a hassle. San Francisco, Toronto, etc. They are all no's. Now, as a matter of fact, Hong Kong has a great geological heritage. Phil showed you a lot of pictures of crowds, high rises of Hong Kong, of Central, of the business district, and with due respect to him. And if that is the perception you've got for Hong Kong, I'm sorry, you're all wrong. Okay, 70% of Hong Kong is outbacks, is unexplored countries, undeveloped countries, put it this way. For those of you who have been to Hong Kong, these are some of our prominent peaks. I wonder how many of you can recognize or have been to some of them. Use a minute. Say this one, very challenging one. Okay, this is called a Sharp Peak in Sai Kung. This one on Lantau Island, where we have some of those houses left behind by some of the missionaries about 70, 80 years ago. This Lantau Sunset Peak. And this one, is Ma On Shan. Professor Matthews, you are Chinese, you look at it every day, right? And this one with the, antenna and the observatories is the highest peak of Hong Kong, just barely below a kilometer in height, Tai Mo Shan. Okay. Wonderful peaks, easily accessible. And these are the landmarks of Hong Kong. Well, obviously, this is the Lion Rock, and then this is Armour Rock, in Sha Tin, about 20 meters tall. Okay, many of you have been to these places or have at least seen these landmarks. But what about this? This is Hong Kong. Okay? This is probably the most interesting and fascinating locality in Hong Kong. It's located on the northeastern corner of Hong Kong, a small island, but with fabulous geology. Okay. In fact, it's closer to China than to Hong Kong. But you can still, easily take a day trip out there on public ferries. Okay, these are interesting rock formations, not far from Aberdeen, and you can take a boat from Aberdeen, and they're located one on the southernmost island and the other at the tip of the Tai Po Peninsula. Wonderful place. This is called the Nine Pin Islands, located on the easternmost side of Hong Kong. Okay. So Hong Kong has actually a fabulous geological resource. And about 10 years ago, Hong Kong government successfully bid for a global geopark. And this is Sai Kung in eastern part of Hong Kong. And what we are looking at is the dam, and this is a cover dam, a secondary dam. Now, back in the 60s, there was a severe shortage of fresh water supply. Some of us who were here, may remember that during the worst of time, we had only 4 hours of fresh water supply every 4 days. And they were talking about cutting it down to 2 hours. Okay? And that was before we had water supplied from China. So to alleviate the water shortage problem, government built 2 dams, 2 reservoirs in Hong Kong by blocking off part of a bay. Like the first one is in this area. They built a dam across the Plover Cove and blocked it off, took out the water, let the water come back in, and formed one of the largest reservoirs. And the other one is on the east side of Hong Kong. They built 2 dams, and what we are seeing, what we are standing on, is one of them. And then they blocked off part of the sea, and then again, pump out all the seawater and let the river water fill it. And it formed this, what we call the High Island Reservoir. When they did it, they had to cut open some slopes and road. And surprisingly, at the road cuts, a lot of these very regular hexagonal-shaped columns were exposed. These are volcanic rock columns formed about 140 million years ago. Not 100 years as designated in the Green Little Book. 140 million years ago. At the time, there was a supervolcanic eruption, deposited a very thick layer of ash, over 400 meters thick, over a few weeks' time. And this ash layer later contracted, cooled, contracted, and cracked up to form a lot of these vertical volcanic columns. These are very remarkable and very unique in the world. I've been to many places in the world, and truly, this is the most spectacular example of these sort of volcanic columns. And so we managed to apply for the UNESCO Global Geopark status. And this is still readily accessible. And people can go there and then admire at the rock columns and try to comprehend the stories behind their formation. In addition, on that little island on the northeastern corner of Hong Kong called Ping Chau, a series of very interesting sedimentary layers are exposed. Now these layers, they showed various colors, red, brown, white, etc., and forming this kind of rhythms in the sedimentary layers. And a lot of interesting findings were made in these rocks. For example, the weathering of the rocks along cracks and crevices produce real interesting checkerboard patterns. You can even see evidence for raindrops that occurred 60 million years ago on the surface of the rock and still preserved there for people to see. So go there, try to comprehend the vastness of time. We're looking at, a drizzle, some kind of a rain shower 60 million years ago, yet we could see evidence for that. There are a lot more. Red rocks in Double Haven area. You can stroll along the coast and look at these beautiful rock formations. When I showed this picture, people could not believe this is Hong Kong, okay? This is Hong Kong. In fact, this is Hong Kong. You can get there. In springtime, the algae in the water and the rocks, they form really scenic, beautiful, fascinating patterns. We have tremendous coastline. 90% of Hong Kong's coastline is like this, not the Victoria Harbour. 90% is like this, with sea cliffs, sea caves, sea arches, and some of the sea arches, you can actually use a canoe, a rowboat, and cut through them. Beaches, and we have numerous natural beaches. Don't go to Repulse Bay, okay? Don't go to Deep Bay. Don't go to the bays on the south side. Those are not natural beaches. They are already reclaimed, okay? They basically brought sand in from Pearl River Delta and then tried to widen the beach. But then there are other places like a western part of Lantau, and those are real natural beaches with authentic sand. And waterfalls, we have numerous waterfalls. And you can easily find a day out and then enjoy the various waterfalls. Some are even climbable. You can actually climb up some of them. Okay. So I hope by now I have convinced you that we do have a very rich geological heritage. And a lot of people like to compare Hong Kong to Singapore. We're side by side. But from my perspective, from a person who think, the average citizen should be entitled to a day out, a city escape in a readily manner, and there's no comparison. We look at open areas. Singapore, 47% of them is open area, but look at Hong Kong, amazingly, close to 80% of Hong Kong's 1,100 square kilometer is green areas. It's green areas. Beaches. They do get beaches, 7 of them, all man-made. But we get numerous ones. They are 166 meters maximum elevation. I live on the 47th floor, and I'm already higher than the highest point on Singapore. They do have one waterfalls. If you enjoy waterfall in an air-conditioned environment, please go to Singapore. And we have numerous of them. And world-class geology, they have none. They have none. I don't even know why they should have geology departments. So for that, on my scorecard, Singapore 0, Hong Kong 5. I like to borrow the kids' word on Honky Kong. Singapore, sorry, our city is better than yours. Okay. Now, so this is a summary of our land use pattern, and I think the key figures that you would be most interested in are our total area, green areas, and 42% of the green areas, of the total areas, are designated country parks and special study areas. And so that still have, we still have about 36%, just open areas and green areas, okay? And very timely that the government just endorsed the report, all the recommendations on the proposed land supply report. And in that land supply report, it outlines a number of options. Okay, all these bullet points are the various initiatives proposed to increase the land supply of Hong Kong. Well, I'm not going to talk about all of them, but the question I'd like to ask is, how would each of these land supply options affect Hong Kong's livability, our natural heritage, and the environment? Okay. Now, obviously, some of the key ones are the reclamation, and there are reclamation sites nominated. And these are nearshore reclamations, basically extending upon existing reclaimed land. I do not think there are a lot of controversies over them. And also, from my perspective, they may not impart major sort of visual blight to the natural landscape. The others that are more concerned and debated are the East Lantau metropolis, that the government proposed to increase, the land area by 1,700 hectares. And there were actually other sites, and two particular ones are south of Lantau, and this one in south of Hong Kong at Po Toi Island. And I don't think they will follow through with these two. Now, the East Lantau metropolis, and we are looking at from, towards the west, looking at Lantau Island. This is Lantau, and Disneyland is over there, just over there. And there are several islands there. What they are going to do is to propose to connect all these islands with, reclaimed areas. I'm no expert in computer, but I try to, sort of add some buildings onto the area, and you make the judgment, okay? Is it going to be a visual blight, or is it going to be okay? Let you think about that. But regardless what they are going to do, if they are going to reclaim 1,700 hectares over that area, this scenery, this view will obviously change. We're looking at Lantau Island from Hong Kong side, and you will be anticipating a megalopolis being, erected there. The other site that they contemplated, they considered once, is the Plover Cove, and this is a reservoir, as I said, used to be a part of a sea bay, and they used a dam to block it off, and now it's one of the most pristine, interesting areas. If they're going to reclaim this, this is what likely will happen. Po Toi Island, which is the southernmost island of Hong Kong. They were, for one point, considering connecting these two islands and then put up some buildings up there. So I'm not a land expert, so I'm not going to make much judgment on those issues. But something I would endorse and approve myself is the development of caverns. And the geology of Hong Kong is very suitable for developing underground caves. And we do have some successful cases. For example, our university, the University of Hong Kong, when we built the extension, because we are so confined in terms of land. So what we did is we moved a water reservoir, used to be, on the surface. we moved the entire water reservoir to underground. We dug a big hole. We dug a big hole and moved the reservoir underground, and sometimes we took students to see it, and then we free up a lot of land space on the surface for buildings. And I think this is something that we would accept, and it does not create a lot of land rights problem. Disturbance to traffic and contamination, pollution, etc., would be contained to some extent. So now, looking at the various options, and I think there are some in the report that could be acceptable. They may generate a little bit of impacts, but would be, I think, acceptable to Hong Kong, like the developments of the brownfield sites and cave-in developments, the small-scale nearshore reclamation, etc. There are some that would need to be carefully considered, not saying that they're not doable, but we need to think about how to do it, like developing the periphery of country parks, the reclamation in Eastern Lantau, and conversion of some agricultural land. There are certainly some that I would say absolutely object to, like large-scale reclamation, and some of the reclamation of interesting and fascinating shorelines, etc. Really, the real question to ask is, we kept talking about increasing land supply, developing, but Hong Kong is very small. We have only about 1,100 square kilometers. And our nature is actually our most precious resource for now. And how do we draw the balance? How do we find the balance between preservation and development? This is something that we need to think about. It's not easy, it's challenging. We talk about demand. We kept talking about increasing land, but yet we talk very little about controlling. We kept talking about supply. We talk very little about controlling the demand. Okay, like some foreign countries, New Zealand already had initiative to limit purchase of the land by the foreigners. Can we go the same route? Okay, doing more on the demand side rather than just endlessly trying to find land to fulfill, to satisfy the need, the supply. And I like, as a teacher and educationist, I like to sometimes question the concept of sustainable development. Honestly, I think sustainable development is an outdated concept. When you talk about sustainable development, ask, what are we trying to sustain? Resources, growth, economic growth. What is sustainable? Resources. You look around this room, every single thing, aluminum, metal, they all come from Earth. And there's no such thing as sustainable development, because this plastic came from oil, petroleum, and it takes the Earth 1 billion days to make petroleum. And there's no way Earth can produce and replenish this material fast enough, and match our consumption. What we should be talking about is controlled development or minimal development. If population grows at 1 or 2%, why do we continuously seek 8, 9% of economic growth? Why shouldn't we keep it at 1 or 2%, or perhaps 3%, a little bit on top, so that we also have a steady increase in the improvement in the standard of living? So these are something that we should talk about. The title of this talk is, of this conference is Past, Present, and Future. And I'm a geologist. Hong Kong has a very, very long past, geologic past, a lot longer than what is outlined in this booklet. the present is something that we have to comprehend and to compromise. And the future, I don't know, perhaps Professor Matthews, who speaks after me, can have more insight. Do we have any for Hong Kong? Okay, and at this point, I have to say good luck to our city, the most livable city. Thank you.